You're listening to Quorum Radio.
CASTRO'S Secrets, Cuban Intelligence, the CIA, and the Assassination of John F. Kennedy by Brian Latell, former CIA Analyst for Latin America, with permission from the author. Winston Scott, CIA Station Chief in Mexico City, trusted the ambassador, Thomas Mann, and shared sensitive information with him. Mann obviously learned about the Hotel del Comercio and its ominous associations primarily from Winston Scott. If they were right, the hotel's alleged connections with Cuban intelligence could have proved to be the missing link in the Kennedy investigation. If the hotel actually served as a pro-Castro, quote, headquarters, inevitably that meant it was used by the DGI for clandestine meetings and to house agents and volunteers. The DGI, already a world-class intelligence agency, was too good to have used only one hotel for such purposes, but there was a high demand for secure operational locations. Hundreds of Latin American youths were flowing through the Mexican capital in 1963 on their way to Cuba, many going for guerrilla warfare and espionage training. The consulate was an obligatory stop on the way. They would utter a password to a DGI officer using consular cover and be granted visas to go to the island. David Phillips ran CIA Cuba operations in Mexico City in 1963. He testified that at least 150 people went to the consulate daily. Why did Oswald choose to stay at the Hotel del Comercio? He knew of an inexpensive alternative that might have better suited him and his fantasies. On the bus ride from Nuevo Laredo, he had recommended the Hotel Cuba to two Australian women, saying he was not going to stay there, but had on previous occasions. The FBI later found the hotel on the Republic of Cuba Street, but uncovered no evidence that Oswald had lodged there at any time since returning from Minsk. If he had stayed there earlier, say when serving the Marine Corps, no evidence of that had surfaced either. But how then did he know of this obscure little place? Did he hear about it in Dallas or New Orleans or read about it? His mention of the hotel to the Australians was perhaps meaningless, another of his idle, incessant lies. But more ominously, it could have meant that he actually had stayed there earlier and was therefore more familiar with Mexico City and Cubans there than has ever been revealed. Ambassador Thomas Mann suspected that Oswald chose the Hotel del Comercio because he was directed there. If so, it would appear that he had been in touch with Cuban operatives, undercover DGI officers, or the assets before he left New Orleans. The second largest concentration of Cuban exiles in the United States resided there in 1963, and according to J. Edgar Hoover, quote, several thousand of them were anti-Castro militants. A prime target of Castro's counterintelligence, the Cuban community almost certainly was penetrated by double agents and informers. Carlos Bringuier thought so. Cuban exile commandos told him that they believed, quote, Castro agent had infiltrated the training camp near New Orleans. So it seems most unlikely that Oswald did not come to the attention of Cuban operatives in New Orleans. Yet, even after his amateurish effort to penetrate Bringuier's organization, street activism, and media appearances, the possibility that he and the DGI were somehow connected was never examined by the FBI. In fact, as is revealed in subsequent chapters, for many years, Cuban intelligence capabilities were grievously underestimated by American intelligence and law enforcement agencies. It was Mann who pressed Oswald's Cuba connection with searing conviction. But he did not have the chance to pursue it for long. Soon after he began waving warning flags, he was silenced. More than 550 people from many walks of life testified before the Warren Commission or provided sworn affidavits, but the ambassador was not among them. He was a dedicated public servant, and once ordered to step aside from the assassination investigation, he complied. Subsequently, he rarely spoke on the record about Kennedy's death and his concerns or why they were quashed. Fortunately, however, two reliable accounts of his experience have survived. 14 years after the assassination, he was interviewed by an investigator of the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Notes of that session show that he was compelled to desist in his Cuba probe, and so, he said, were Win Scott and Clark Anderson, the FBI legal attaché at the embassy. Mann described their repudiation as incredible. The ambassador's second, more detailed account is included in an unpublished memoir he wrote in 1982 when he was 70. quote, the embassy received instructions to cease our investigation of Oswald's visit to Mexico and to request the Mexican government to do the same. Having only begun our investigation, I sent a telegram to the Department of State asking that the instruction be reconsidered and that the embassy be allowed to conclude its investigation. This request was denied. No reasons were given. Similar instructions were received by embassy intelligence officers from the intelligence agencies to which they reported. I recall telling my associates in the embassy that Washington must have known something we did not know, and noted that our instructions could not have been sent without the knowledge and consent of Robert Kennedy, who was then Attorney General. The reason remains a mystery to me. We thought there was a good chance we would be able to turn up additional information of importance, end quotes. In the weeks immediately after the assassination, Mann was working closely with Win Scott, who shared his concerns about Cuba. But they were blindsided by several of the most powerful officials in Washington, and probably by Lyndon Johnson, the new president. Secretary of State Dean Rusk admitted in the Warren Commission testimony that after the assassination, he, quote, had a number of exchanges with Mann about the presence in Mexico of Mr. Oswald, end quotes. The discussions, he said, quote, raised questions of the most far-reaching character involving the possibility of another government, end quote, and did not name Cuba or Castro. He declined to comment further. Rusk had approved the administration's silencing of his ambassador and no doubt hoped not to be asked about that. Mann was never censured or reprimanded, and in fact was promoted to become a favorite of fellow Texan Johnson, but his rallying for a more aggressive investigation of Oswald in Cuba brought him only grief. Others also prevailed against him. Robert Kennedy, J. Edgar Hoover, and Richard Helms at CIA wanted the Mexican investigation shut down. Kennedy and Helms feared that an assassination plot against Castro that they approved, it is described in Chapter 8, 9, and 10, might be exposed. They worried especially because it most likely had been sanctioned by the fallen president. The Warren Commission was never told of the CIA assassination planning that, in one of history's strangest coincidences, was coming to closure in a Paris safe house at precisely the moment Kennedy was murdered. Those who participated in the cover-up knew that Chief Justice Earl Warren and the 6 other distinguished commissioners would not have shied from a broader investigation of Cuba had they known of the plots against Castro. And if the commission had demanded more stringent support from the intelligence agencies, their report to the American people might have raised the specter of Cuban influence on Oswald. President Johnson feared that even such a qualified finding could have raised a firestorm of demands for military action against Castro. Within days of Kennedy's death, J. Edgar Hoover told Johnson that Oswald had acted alone, that he was not part of a foreign conspiracy. A top FBI aide disagreed and testified in 1976 that at the time, quote, there was no data to support that judgment, end quotes. So, as Mann persisted, he ran afoul of the vindictive FBI director. Hoover came to detest the ambassador, denigrating him as a, quote, Sherlock Holmes, end quotes, for his efforts in Mexico and ordering FBI personnel to, quote, avoid any suggestions he offered. The tensions and fears that Mann had ignited put him in the administration's crosshairs. He was placed under audio surveillance, probably by his own subordinates at the embassy. Mann was convinced that Hoover, perhaps carrying out instructions from the Attorney General, had ordered a telephone tap installed in his residence to listen on their private conversations. His enemies may have feared needlessly that he would leak his dilemma to the press or influential members of Congress. Exactly 1 month after Kennedy's assassination, the ambassador was recalled to Washington short of tour. In the end, the Warren Commission rejected his concerns about the Hotel del Comercio. The way was thereby cleared for it to be declared that it found no evidence of Cuban government involvement in a conspiracy. According to Appendix 12 of the report, quote, investigation of the hotel at which Oswald stayed had failed to uncover any evidence that the hotel is unusual in any way that would relate to Oswald's visit. It is not especially popular among Cubans, and there is no indication that it is used as a meeting place for extremist or revolutionary organizations. Investigations of other guests of the hotel who were there when Oswald was have failed to uncover anything creating suspicion, end quotes.